Well, greetings and welcome to the Sunday preview. Um, we're going to be having a confirmation service at 8:30 on Sunday, and then a regular service at the 11 o'clock. So there'll be two parts of the sermon. One will be about the beginning of Paul's ministry. Second part of the sermon will be at the end of Paul's ministry, Paul's encouragement to Timothy, young Timothy, who was Paul's protege, who was going to be taking over for Paul. So at the second service, I'm going to have parts 1 and part 2. At the first service, just part 1, because the words that Paul offers to Timothy to hang in there, to keep the faith, that he's run a good race and he's finished, he has kept the faith. That is more appropriate for our confirmation students at 8:30. But if you're listening online to the service, then you'll get the whole ball of wax. So we're on chapter 29 of the story, and we're talking about Paul's mission. And we're looking at his mission to the Gentiles. Now, what's interesting, I talked at the Adult Forum, the first 8 chapters, the early church was reaching out to Jewish Christians, and that's all, not the Gentiles. It's only when Paul is converted from the Saul of Tarsus to Paul, the Christian apostles, that everything dramatically changes. And through a series of meetings with Peter and Paul and the early church, the church council of Jerusalem, they decided that, yes, the gospel needed to be preached to the Gentiles and not just Jewish Christians. Had Paul not come around, early Christianity, had it remained a Messianic Jewish sect or small group of people, it might have just ended up dying there. But Paul broke out of the mold and said, if anyone is in Christ, there's a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. There's neither Jew nor Gentiles, slave nor free, male or female, because we're all in Christ. So at the beginning of the sermon on Sunday, I talk about Paul being a radical Jewish scholar who was so convinced that this new Jesus movement was terrible that he went around imprisoning believers in Jesus. But then on the road to Damascus, he had that experience when he fell to the ground with a great big flash of light. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Saul says, who is this? Well, this is Jesus, whom God sent to redeem his people. So Paul became, his name changed from Saul to Paul. He became a Christ follower and started using the Greek name Paul instead of Saul. He went from place to place proclaiming Jesus to the Jews first in the synagogues before he got kicked out of so many of them, and then to the Gentiles. They had their home church in Antioch, a couple hours drive, I'm not sure how far of a walk it is, north of Jerusalem. And they commissioned in the church of Antioch Paul and Barnabas and sent them out on a missionary journey to spread the news that Jesus is the Messiah and that he's risen from the dead. The first missionary journey took them to the island of Cyprus, where they encountered a Jewish source. Much of this is in the book of Acts. The history of Paul is in the book of Acts. They encountered in Cyprus a Jewish sorcerer who confronted them, and a Roman official who embraced the gospel. They went to Galatia, which is in now southeast Turkey. They were invited to preach in a synagogue, and after an initial favorable reaction, they faced persecution, so they went and they started focusing then on the Gentiles. Paul was joined by a number of other workers, including many women. Also, Timothy and Silas, for his second missionary journey, they visited cities in Macedonia, Philippi. A church was begun there in Lydia's home. Lydia was the first person baptized in non-Jewish territory, first Christian baptized. Margaret and I went and visited where Lydia's home was. Now it's kind of a hotel. There's a church there honoring Lydia and the waters of baptism. We put our feet in where the waters were, where Paul baptized Lydia, the first Christian believer outside of Jewish territory. Later, Paul and Silas were thrown in jail, where their faith convinced the jailer and they were freed. Remember the earthquake and the shackles came off. Paul then met Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth. And he was again opposed by the Jews, but many Gentiles, including the women Priscilla and Aquila, believed, and so Paul stayed in Corinth for about a year and a half. After returning to Antioch, Paul went on his third journey. He strengthened the churches in the areas of Galatia. Then he went to Ephesus and stayed there for 2 or 3 years, teaching, witnessing to both Jews and Greeks. And many people came to faith. The word spread. But there was also in Ephesus a riot then where some of the people drove Paul and Silas out. So Paul kept writing letters and assisting the churches he'd already started. His longest letter was written to the church in Rome. Romans is kind of a graduate level letter, very difficult even in English, but the theological grasp that Paul had was just astounding. He wrote letters to Corinth, Ephesus, Colossae, many different places, and just kept witnessing to the ends of the earth. Paul is an amazing, utterly amazing person. One chapter you might read in the next day or two is 1 Corinthians 13, where we call it the love chapter. Love is patient and kind. It's not self-serving. It does what is best for others. Paul was writing not to a couple getting married at the altar. Paul was writing to a Christian community. That's the kind of love that churches should have. Patient and kind, not jealous, not boastful, not arrogant, not rude. He's writing not to a couple standing at the altar. He's writing to a church. He's writing to the church at Corinth. That's what should characterize them. So read through 1 Corinthians 13. I'm not going to be preaching on it on Sunday, but it just gives you an idea of the picture that Paul had for what the church should be, the love that it should exude. So read through that. Think about how we do that at Zion, and think about how we might even do that better at Zion in our ministry together. So I look forward to seeing you on Sunday, or I hope you listen online, and until I see you again, you take care. Okay, bye-bye.